Morning, guys. Everything new under the sun. There's a lot of stuff happening right now in the markets. Sorry for my squeaking table. There's a lot of stuff happening as it relates to the market, economic trouble around the world. We have the trade wars, the tariffs. We just had recently Friday Twitter go down 20%. If you can watch BP Earthwatch, he does a good video on that. Stocks are heading downwards. There's trouble in the markets. There's ups and downs. Facebook lost, was it 19% of their value, $4 billion, something like that. And there's just a ton of articles on zerohedge.com as one example, which speak about trouble in the markets and speaking about people betting on the short side of things, betting that stocks will go downwards. And the markets themselves are starting to go into a period of uncertainty where people are starting to wonder. They're starting to kind of pull out of the market. They're starting to cash out. We had some big volatility in the crypto space, and lots of things going on here. Strange, the massive drops in value of Twitter and Facebook. These are newsworthy events. Here's an article from Zero Hedge. Big Short Eisman is now shorting Tesla. So you have these big market players, and they are now shorting, which means they're betting that the value of companies will go downwards. Having sent lewd photos to one critic and threatened legal action to another critical blogger, we wonder what billionaire Musk will do now that Steve, the Big Short Eisman, is explicitly shorting Tesla stock, and Tesla is in trouble. That's one of the big companies that could go down. And of course, the governments are hugely invested. They've got a lot of money from governments for their technology. The Neuberger Berman Group money manager, who famously predicted the collapse of subprime mortgages before the 2008 financial collapse, blasted Musk on Bloomberg TV this morning. Elon Musk is a very, very smart man, but there are a lot of smart people in this world, and you've got to execute. He's got execution problems. So he is one guy, one big money investor who has a track record and sees at the very least Tesla going downwards, and he's betting that Tesla will go downwards, and that's going to cause trouble in the markets, further volatility on top of what Facebook and Twitter have done to the markets. Here's one another one from Zero Hedge. Trader warns it's pure folly to think next week isn't huge, and it's speaking of BP Earthwatch coined Friday as Black Friday as it relates to the big names that lost a lot of money on the markets Friday. What's going to happen on Monday when everybody wakes up? With VIX trading with a 12 handle, and the White House patting itself on the back after a 4-handle GDP print, one could be forgiven for thinking all is well. Here's Nasdaq's VIX. It is flat over the last week despite chaos in mega cap tech. That would be pure folly, according to former fund manager and FX trader Richard Breslow, who warns that next week is going to be huge for markets for a number of reasons. The markets were mostly quiet overnight, yet for some reason I feel breathless. It's a placid-looking duck on the surface, paddling furiously beneath the surface. Options volatilities remain low. Volumes are mediocre, other than occasional spikes. Traders are furiously trying to ignore the news, but they are nevertheless a lot of things in play. Next week is utterly jam-packed with events and economic number releases. It goes on here. Are you a central bank junkie? There are a slew of monetary policy meetings. Will the Bank of Japan talk about tinkering with its yield curve policies? And Japan Japan in general is in bad economic trouble. There's no digging out from under the debt that they owe. Just where does the Bank of England stand with so many countervailing factors pulling it in different directions? You've got the Brexit and all these sorts of things weighing on the market there. Certainly India's RBI might reshuffle the Asian crosses. You've got changes and central banks all over the world with all sorts of troubles. I want to hear from Brazil's BCB. Are policymakers worried or still in a wait-and-see mode? Accompanying statements are unlikely to pass quietly. When you have all the central banks around the world with all sorts of troubles, doesn't this look like anything could trigger a massive economic collapse? Well, U.S. employment and China PMIs are on the docket. It's hard to believe that those China numbers won't move all sorts of things. Again, we're talking about trigger events. With all the troubles the central banks around the world of every country are dealing with, when all those troubles are on the table, what does it take? What is the trigger event to cause an economic collapse effectively? Maybe you follow earnings releases. Berkshire Hathaway is always a ratings magnet. European banks are weighing in and tell me you won't be salivating to see the latest on Tesla. And again, we just read that article about Eisman, Steve Eisman, what's his name? Shorting Tesla, believing it's going to go down, and he's the one who called it prior to 2008. The article says there's a laundry list. You get the idea. It's going to be busy, possibly fun, he says, and could tell us a lot about what the markets might set up for the run towards this year's finish line. And, we're talking about the previous video was about war in the fall period by the U.S. on Iran. Could we see a big war there? Could we see an economic collapse trigger? That's always an economic watch time, and we're getting very, very close to the time. I mean, an economic collapse should have happened in 2008. It should have went completely down. It was only propped up by money printing. The central banks printed a whole bunch of money out of thin air, created a bunch of wealth out of thin air, but that isn't backed by anything, and increased the debt hugely. The debt's at $21 trillion, whatever it's at now under Trump, just for the United States, and the world is ready to collapse, basically. Here's a couple of headlines here. Bank of America, there are 6 triggers for the next market crash. I won't go through this article. I'll put the link in the description, though. There's triggers for a market crash. What we've seen is unprecedented. Mysterious new whale emerges in the market. What's this about? Well, a reader who works for the market-making group in the Euro-dollar options writes to describe a new ED market entrant and notes that what we've seen over the past 3 months is unprecedented. A mysterious customer has been trading downside put spread ratios where they are selling the extra put units. They have done this to point where they are short millions of put units in long dated options. Goldman Sachs has even started to take the other side of the trade for size. So there's people betting on both sides of this, which means there's going to be a lot of volatility. Consensus estimates that the local Chicago trading groups is that the customer is short approximately 3 million puts, amounting to 1 million straddles in volatility risk. You have a whale like this come in, and they put massive shorts on the table. They could either be brilliant and they're going to make a ton of money when this thing does go down, or they could be putting it there on purpose so that when the market goes up, maybe their action would actually trigger the collapse, because then they would owe millions and billions of dollars and trigger an economic collapse that way and trigger huge economic volatility. Well, let's see here. Here's records. Get ready for the 100-year flood. One of the long-standing reasons to own physical gold or to invest in gold mining shares is to hedge geopolitical risk or risk of natural disaster. So they're talking about the possibility, basically, of an economic flood coming short. Hotspots around the world include Syria, Ukraine, Israel, and its confrontation with Hamas and Hezbollah, Saudi war with Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen, and conflicting claims in the South China Sea. We see wars and rumors of wars. That's just scratching the surface. It says natural disasters abound from extreme flooding in Hurricane Harvey and lava flows on Kilauea. You have all these things in the markets leading to volatility and instability, and all this suggests that things are heating up in the world, literally and figuratively, and potential for economic collapse is kind of like a 100-year flood, and that's what they're doing the math on here. This means that over a 30-year period, the probability of a 100-year flood is 26% or more. That's more than one chance in 4. And it's basically saying, the chances are high, based on the current geopolitical events, that an economic collapse is going to occur. It says the 5 major drawdowns in 31 years on average is about 1 every 6 years. The latest such event was 10 years ago, so the world is overdue for another crisis based on market history, based on the 2008 collapse. Something seems to happen every 6 years. We've put that off with money printing, but I think things are coming down quickly. It says, doesn't mean we need to overcome any cognitive bias about future being like the past, or about recent calm being a good forecast of the future, called recency bias. When the 100-year flood does hit, when the 100-year, when the economic collapse does hit, it's too late. Basically, the warning of all this is that there's so much going on in the world. There's so much debt. There's so much market volatility and trouble overhanging. There's wars, rumors of wars. And I think the Bible kind of indicates, when reading between the lines, that there's no Western governments involved in Ezekiel 38, Isaiah 17. In the major wars, Psalm 83, you don't see Western powers, Western nations mentioned anywhere there. What happens to them? Well, I think it's an economic collapse, and I think that's coming down the pipe shortly. And we see all sorts of market troubles as we speak right now. Facebook down 19%, Twitter down 20%. These are massive, massive drops for these massive companies. And when is it going to trickle down to the whole economy? We haven't seen a correction since 2008. 2008 wasn't allowed to correct properly to get rid of the cancer from the economic system. So that means basically they kick the can down the road, but not only that, they printed money to thin air, which creates an even bigger problem. So when the giant does fall, it's going to fall even harder. The bigger you are, the harder you fall. And that's what basically the world is set up for. A massive, massive fall, unlike anything we've ever seen before. When this comes down the pipe, this will kick into high gear end-time Bible prophecy. This will take out all Western nations from end-time prophetic Bible prophecy. It will set us up for a mark of the beast system, and it'll set us up for a one world government and an antichrist figure to come into power to save us all, defeat us, because we'll be starving in a Mad Max type scenario. This isn't just hearsay. This isn't fanciful thinking. This is what the Bible describes. This is what history dictates has happened every time all these things have converged. Guys, I will leave it there. There's a lot of stuff happening. Are you prepared? Stuff is coming down the pipe quick, and we could see something interesting happen in the fall period. It's always a time for economic collapse. Not to mention we have, again, a potential strike on Iran. When that strike does occur, what's that going to trigger? Significant things, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.